You keep asking for understanding because you have not yet learned to trust your own reason. If your peace still depends on other people agreeing with you, then your life is still being ruled from outside. Here you will learn to separate what belongs to you from what does not, and to live with discipline when judgment from others feels sharp and unfair. Subscribe if you want steady Stoic guidance that speaks plainly and helps you build a mind that does not bend under pressure. Stay here if you are ready to stop reacting, stop defending, and start examining your own thoughts with honesty. This video will show you how to meet criticism, silence, misunderstanding, and public opinion without losing your center. Each lesson is direct, practical, and rooted in the daily work of virtue. Nothing here asks for performance. It asks for self-command. Begin now without delay today. Number 1. Guard your silence when others demand endless explanations. You speak too much when you are afraid to stand alone with your own judgment. That is the truth. Every unnecessary explanation comes from the same hidden weakness. You want to control how people see you. You want relief from their misunderstanding. You want to escape the discomfort of being judged. So you begin defending yourself before anyone has even asked for an answer. You explain your choices, you explain your silence, you explain your boundaries, you explain your failures, you explain your change, and with every needless explanation you hand your inner authority to someone else. Look carefully at your own life. How many times have you exhausted yourself trying to make another person understand you completely? How many nights have you replayed conversations in your mind because someone judged your actions unfairly? How many times have you written long messages trying to prove that your intentions were pure? You believed that if you could just find the right words, then their opinion would finally change and peace would return to your mind. But peace never came. Another explanation always appeared necessary. Another defense always seemed required. Another person always misunderstood you, and slowly, without noticing it, you trained yourself to live under the authority of other minds. Your peace became dependent on their agreement. Your confidence became dependent on their approval. Your silence became impossible because you feared what others might assume if you stopped explaining yourself. This is not freedom. This is servitude to opinion. The disciplined mind understands something the emotional mind refuses to accept. You do not control the judgments of others. You never did. You cannot enter another person's mind and force wisdom into it. You cannot force fairness into a bitter person. You cannot force understanding into someone committed to misunderstanding you. And the moment you accept this fully, a great amount of suffering leaves your life immediately. The problem is not that people misunderstand you. The problem is that you believe their misunderstanding threatens your worth. That is why you rush to defend yourself. That is why silence feels dangerous to you. You have tied your identity to the approval of unstable minds. But what does reason say? Reason says your character is your responsibility. Their opinion is not. Reason says your actions belong to you. Their interpretation belongs to them. Reason says, if you acted with honesty, discipline, and justice, then endless explanation changes nothing essential. A person who lives according to virtue does not spend their life managing appearances. They spend their life governing themselves. This is why the disciplined man speaks carefully and rarely, not because he is weak, not because he is afraid, but because he understands that words cannot force wisdom upon those unwilling to see clearly. There is a deep form of vanity hidden inside constant self-defense. It appears humble on the surface, but underneath it is still attachment to reputation. You believe every misunderstanding must be corrected because you cannot tolerate being seen imperfectly. But you are not harmed by being misunderstood. You are harmed when you abandon your principles, trying to erase every false opinion others create about you. You must learn the difference between clarification and emotional pleading. Clarification is calm, direct, and limited. Emotional pleading is endless. Clarification speaks once. Pleading repeats itself because fear remains unsatisfied. Clarification serves truth. Pleading serves insecurity. Observe yourself carefully the next time someone questions your choices. Watch how quickly emotion rises inside you. Your chest tightens, your thoughts race, your mind begins preparing arguments before the other person has even finished speaking. Why? Because your ego feels threatened. You think their judgment reduces your value as a human being. But no external judgment can reduce a disciplined character. Only your own actions can do that. If someone calls you selfish because you established a necessary boundary, then their words change nothing about the boundary itself. If someone accuses you unfairly after you acted honestly, then their accusation does not stain your character. If someone chooses to misunderstand your silence, your growth, or your decisions, that belongs to their judgment, not your conscience. You waste your strength when you try to control what was never yours to control. There are people who will misunderstand you no matter how clearly you speak. There are people who are committed to seeing you through the lens of their resentment, insecurity, envy, or disappointment. You could explain yourself for hours, and they would still reshape your words into whatever supports their existing judgment. Why continue surrendering your peace to this endless process? A disciplined mind asks a different question. Not how can I make everyone understand me, but have I acted according to reason and virtue? That is the question that matters. You must begin practicing silence deliberately. Not wounded silence, not passive-aggressive silence, not silence used to manipulate others, calm, rational silence, the silence of a person no longer desperate for external validation. When someone misunderstands you, pause before responding. Feel the impulse to defend yourself immediately. Do not obey it automatically. Study it first. Ask yourself honestly, what exactly are you trying to protect? Truth rarely panics. Virtue rarely rushes. The uncontrolled ego always does. You have been trained by habit to react instantly to judgment. Someone criticizes you and immediately you begin constructing a defense. Someone doubts your intentions and immediately you begin explaining your entire history. Someone questions your choices and immediately you begin justifying your life to them as though you are standing trial. This habit destroys inner stability because it teaches your mind that peace depends on external agreement. It does not. Peace depends on alignment between your actions and your conscience, nothing else. The disciplined person understands that explanation has limits. Beyond a certain point, words no longer serve truth, they serve fear, and fear disguised as communication is still fear. There are moments where one calm sentence is enough. There are moments where no response is required at all. And there are moments where silence carries greater strength than any argument you could produce. Not every accusation deserves your energy. Not every misunderstanding deserves correction. Not every opinion deserves entrance into your inner world. You must become more selective about where your attention goes because attention is part of your life. Every hour spent obsessing over another person's perception is an hour stolen from your own self-governance. Think about how much energy you have lost trying to appear reasonable to unreasonable people. Think about how much mental peace has been destroyed by replaying conversations, trying to perfect explanations that should never have been necessary in the first place. Your task is not to perform innocence constantly before the world. Your task is to cultivate character so deeply that your conscience remains steady even when others speak falsely about you. This requires courage because silence often feels unbearable at first. The ego fears silence because silence removes the possibility of controlling perception. Once your explanation ends, you must face the uncomfortable truth that others are free to think whatever they want about you. And they are. You cannot chain another mind to your preferred image of yourself. Accept this fully, and your life becomes lighter. The desire to be understood by everyone is emotional slavery. No disciplined person builds their identity on something so unstable. Public opinion changes daily. Human judgment is inconsistent, emotional, and often careless. If you depend on it for inner security, then your peace will always remain fragile. Instead, return your attention to what belongs to you. Your thoughts, your choices, your conduct, your discipline, your honesty, your response to difficulty. This is where your power exists. A person with strong character can tolerate misunderstanding because they no longer confuse reputation with virtue. Reputation exists in other minds. Virtue exists in your actions. One belongs to chance and opinion, the other belongs to deliberate choice. You must train yourself daily to remember this distinction. Each morning, ask yourself, what is truly under my control today? Your words are under your control. Your actions are under your control. Your willingness to act with integrity is under your control. But whether others approve, understand, praise, or condemn you is not. Begin your day remembering this before the world pulls you back into emotional dependence. And each evening, examine yourself honestly. Where did you speak from fear today? Where did you over-explain because you wanted approval? Where did you abandon calmness trying to manage another person's opinion? Do not judge yourself harshly during this examination, but do not lie either. A person who refuses honest self-examination cannot become free. There is another truth you must confront. Constant explanation often becomes a way of avoiding solitude with yourself. If you are always trying to convince others, then you never sit quietly long enough to examine your own motives deeply. Endless outward defense distracts you from inward discipline. Silence removes distraction. Silence forces self-confrontation. This is why many people fear it. When you stop explaining yourself constantly, you begin hearing your own mind clearly. You begin noticing how much of your behavior was driven by fear of rejection. You begin seeing how often you betrayed your own judgment to remain accepted. You begin understanding that much of your exhaustion came not from life itself, but from carrying the impossible burden of controlling how everyone perceives you. No rational person accepts such a burden because it cannot be carried successfully. You were not born to manage appearances endlessly. You were born to govern your own mind with discipline and clarity. There is strength in becoming difficult to provoke. There is strength in remaining composed while others demand emotional reactions from you. Many people become uncomfortable when they cannot control your emotions through accusation, guilt, or misunderstanding. They expect immediate defense because they are accustomed to emotional chaos. When you remain calm, they interpret your silence as weakness because they have never learned the difference between restraint and surrender. But restraint is power. The uncontrolled person reacts instantly. The disciplined person chooses carefully. Do not mistake emotional impulsiveness for honesty. Real honesty requires self-command. Real honesty sometimes says very little because it understands that unnecessary speech creates unnecessary suffering. You do not need to attend every argument you are invited into. You do not need to defend every life decision publicly. You do not need to explain your healing to people committed to your old identity. You do not need to justify your boundaries to those who benefited from your lack of them. You do not need to prove your goodness constantly. A life governed by reason becomes quieter because it no longer wastes energy on performances. This does not mean becoming cold or arrogant. The disciplined person remains willing to speak truth when necessary. They remain willing to admit mistakes openly. They remain willing to apologize sincerely when wrong. Stoic restraint is not stubborn pride. It is freedom from emotional compulsion. If you made a mistake, admit it simply. Correct it if possible. Learn from it, then move forward without endless self-defense. A rational person does not spend weeks constructing explanations to protect their ego. They face reality directly, and if you acted rightly, then stand calmly inside that truth, even if others refuse to recognize it. One of the hardest disciplines in life is allowing others to misunderstand you while remaining faithful to your principles. But this discipline builds enormous inner strength because it breaks your addiction to external approval. At first, this practice will feel uncomfortable. You will feel exposed. Your mind will scream for defense. It will invent reasons why this situation is different and why you absolutely must explain yourself one more time. Observe this carefully. Your mind is revealing its attachments. Do not obey every impulse your mind produces. A person becomes free when they stop treating every emotional urge as a command. Practice sitting with misunderstanding without rushing to erase it. Practice allowing silence to exist between yourself and judgment. Practice tolerating temporary discomfort instead of sacrificing long-term peace for immediate reassurance. This is training. And like all training, it strengthens through repetition. The world will continue producing opinions about you. Some fair, some unfair, some thoughtful, some careless. This will never end. If you build your emotional stability on changing those opinions, then your life will remain unstable forever. But if you build your stability on disciplined character, then external judgment loses much of its power over you. You begin walking differently through life, more calmly, more deliberately, less desperate, less reactive. You stop speaking just to reduce anxiety. You stop explaining yourself to people who have already chosen their conclusions. You stop chasing emotional permission to live according to your own reasoned judgment. And something surprising happens when you no longer fear misunderstanding. Your words become stronger, because now when you speak, you are not begging, you are not performing, you are not seeking approval. You are simply expressing truth clearly and calmly. Few people ever reach this level of inner freedom because few people are willing to disappoint others without collapsing inwardly. They would rather exhaust themselves explaining endlessly than tolerate temporary disapproval. But the examined life demands greater courage than that. You cannot govern yourself while remaining emotionally dependent on universal approval. The disciplined mind accepts a hard truth. Some people will judge you unfairly no matter what you do. Some relationships will end because your growth makes others uncomfortable. Some individuals will create false stories about you because truth does not serve their emotions. None of this removes your responsibility to act virtuously, but neither does it require endless defense. Live clearly, speak honestly, act justly. Then let people think what they will. This is not indifference to morality. It is devotion to reality. Reality says you are responsible for your choices, not for controlling every interpretation others create. Reality says your peace is destroyed more by your reactions than by external events themselves. Reality says no amount of explanation can give you permanent protection from criticism. So stop seeking safety where it cannot be found. Instead, strengthen the one thing that remains fully available to you at every moment: your own character. Train yourself to pause before reacting. Train yourself to examine your motives honestly. Train yourself to speak less and observe more. Train yourself to endure misunderstanding without panic. Train yourself to return constantly to reason instead of emotional impulse. This is the work, not tomorrow, not after life becomes easier. Now, because your days are limited whether you accept this or not. Time is leaving your hands continuously. And every year spent performing for the opinions of others is a year stolen from your own self-mastery. One day your life will end, and none of these endless explanations will matter. What will matter is whether you governed yourself with courage, discipline, justice, and clarity while you had the chance. Do not waste another year begging to be understood by everyone around you. Stand firmly inside your principles. Correct yourself when wrong. Remain calm when judged unfairly. Speak when necessary. Remain silent when wisdom demands silence. And stop surrendering your inner authority to the unstable opinions of other people. Your mind can become stronger than this habit. Your character can become steadier than this fear, but only if you stop running from the difficult freedom of governing yourself. Number 2. Accept your actions without begging strangers for approval. You have spent too much of your life asking silent questions every time you entered a room. Do they approve of me? Do they respect me? Do they agree with my choices? You may not speak these questions aloud, but your behavior reveals them constantly. You soften your words to avoid rejection. You delay decisions because someone might disagree. You abandon what your own reason already knows because you fear standing alone. Then you wonder why your mind feels weak and divided. A person who cannot act without approval becomes a servant to every shifting opinion around them. Their direction changes with praise and criticism. Their confidence rises and falls according to reactions they cannot control. Their peace disappears the moment another person disapproves of them. This is not a small weakness. This is the destruction of inner authority. Look honestly at your own habits. How many times have you betrayed your better judgment because you wanted acceptance? How many times have you stayed silent when truth should have been spoken because you feared discomfort? How many times have you changed your behavior simply because you could not tolerate the possibility of being disliked? You call this being considerate. Often it is cowardice wearing a polite face. The disciplined mind understands a hard truth early. Approval is not a reliable measure of whether your actions are right. Crowds praise foolishness every day. Weak minds reward conformity because independent judgment unsettles them. If your conscience depends on agreement from others, then your principles are already unstable. You were not given reason so you could hand it away at the first sign of social pressure. You were given reason so you could examine your choices honestly and act according to what is just, whether others applaud or condemn you. This is why so many people remain trapped in resentment and confusion. They do not choose their actions from clear judgment. They choose from fear of rejection. Then afterward, they feel anger because they abandoned themselves once again. A person who constantly seeks permission from others slowly loses respect for their own mind. You feel this every time you ignore your own judgment to keep temporary peace. Something inside you becomes weaker. Your words lose force. Your decisions lose clarity. Your inner life becomes divided because one part of you sees the truth, while another part bows before approval. The disciplined life begins when you stop asking strangers to authorize your existence. Notice how much emotional suffering comes from trying to control how you are received. You think endlessly before speaking because you are calculating reactions. You replay conversations because you fear negative judgment. You hesitate before making necessary changes because someone may not understand them. You become exhausted not from action itself, but from the constant management of appearances. This exhaustion is self-created. You are carrying responsibilities that were never yours. Other people are responsible for their opinions. You are responsible for your conduct. Once you confuse these two things, your mind loses stability. A rational person examines their actions carefully before acting. They ask whether their behavior is honest, whether it is just, whether it is necessary, whether it aligns with their principles. But once they have acted according to reason, they do not continue begging for emotional confirmation afterward. Think about how much of your life has been spent waiting for reassurance, waiting for someone to tell you that your choices are acceptable, waiting for approval before trusting your own conclusions, waiting for validation before feeling permitted to move forward. Meanwhile, your days continue disappearing. Time does not pause while you seek permission to become yourself. There are people who will never approve of your growth because your discipline exposes their excuses. There are people who become uncomfortable when you establish boundaries because they benefited from your lack of them. There are people who criticize your changes because your self-respect reminds them of their own neglect. If you require universal approval before acting rightly, then you will remain trapped forever. The disciplined person accepts something, the fearful mind resists. Being disliked is sometimes the price of living honestly, not because virtue seeks conflict, but because truth often interrupts the comfort of others. When you stop living for approval, your relationships change immediately. Some people become distant because they no longer control you through guilt. Others accuse you of changing because they preferred the version of you that ignored your own needs. You must not panic during this process. Growth always reveals which relationships were built on mutual respect and which were built on emotional dependence. Do not misunderstand this teaching. Stoic discipline does not mean becoming harsh, arrogant, or indifferent toward others. It means refusing to abandon reason for the sake of acceptance. It means treating people fairly without making your inner peace dependent on their praise. A person governed by wisdom can listen to criticism calmly without collapsing emotionally. They can admit mistakes openly without losing dignity. They can change their mind when reason demands it without feeling humiliated. Why? Because their self-worth no longer depends on appearing flawless before others. This is real strength. Weakness hides behind performance. Strength remains steady even when misunderstood. You must begin practicing approval independence deliberately. Start with small moments. When you make a decision, ask yourself whether it comes from reason or fear of judgment. Before speaking, ask yourself whether your words are honest or merely designed to secure acceptance. When criticism arrives, pause before reacting and examine whether your distress comes from actual wrongdoing or wounded vanity. This examination changes everything because it forces you to confront the true source of your emotional agitation. Many people claim they want freedom while remaining completely dependent on public opinion. They fear silence because silence leaves them alone with their own judgment. They fear disagreement because disagreement forces them to stand without support. They fear criticism because criticism reveals how fragile their self-image really is. But no one becomes free while emotionally chained to approval. Freedom begins the moment you realize that another person's opinion cannot determine your moral worth. Their praise does not make you virtuous. Their rejection does not make you worthless. Your character is revealed by your actions, not by external applause. This understanding must become a daily discipline, not merely an idea you admire. Each morning, remind yourself that you may encounter criticism, misunderstanding, or rejection today. Expect it calmly, instead of acting surprised by human behavior. Prepare your mind before entering the day. Say to yourself clearly that your task is not to secure admiration, but to govern your conduct with integrity. Then throughout the day, observe your reactions carefully. When someone disapproves of you, notice the immediate movement inside your mind. Notice how quickly you want to defend, explain, or reshape yourself. Most people never examine this impulse. They obey it automatically. The disciplined person pauses and asks whether external agreement is truly necessary in this moment. Often it is not. Often silence and steady action are enough. You must also examine your relationship with praise because attachment to approval hides there as well. Many people believe they are independent because they ignore criticism while secretly depending on admiration for emotional stability. This is still dependence. If compliments control your confidence, then eventually insults will control your suffering. The disciplined mind accepts praise without becoming intoxicated by it. They accept criticism without becoming destroyed by it. Their center remains within their own reasoned judgment. This balance requires training because the human mind naturally seeks comfort from external recognition. But comfort is not the goal of Stoic practice. Clarity is. Self-governance is. freedom from unnecessary emotional disturbances, there is another uncomfortable truth you must face. Constant approval seeking often disguises avoidance of responsibility. If others approve your actions, then you feel protected from self-examination. You can say, "Everyone agreed, so the choice must have been correct." But the disciplined life demands deeper honesty than this. You must learn to stand by your decisions after careful reflection, even when no one supports you. This does not mean becoming stubborn. It means becoming accountable to your own conscience first. When your actions are guided by reason, you no longer need endless reassurance afterward. You accept responsibility for your choices calmly. If you acted wrongly, you correct yourself. If you acted rightly, you remain steady regardless of reaction. This steadiness creates inner peace because your emotional life stops depending on unpredictable external responses. Observe how approval-seeking affects even simple moments of daily life. You hesitate to express honest thoughts because someone may disagree. You hide interests that others may judge. You remain in unhealthy situations because leaving might disappoint people. You apologize for decisions that required no apology. You shape your personality according to the expectations surrounding you until eventually you no longer recognize your own genuine character. This is what happens when fear governs the mind. The Stoic path demands something harder but infinitely more peaceful. It demands that you return authority to reason. Reason asks simple questions. Is this action honest? Is it just? Is it necessary? Is it within my control? Is it aligned with the kind of person I claim to become? These questions matter more than whether strangers approve. You must stop measuring your life through external reactions. Human opinion changes constantly. A person praises you today and criticizes you tomorrow. Crowds celebrate one thing in the morning and condemn it by evening. If your stability depends on approval, then your emotional state will remain unstable forever. Instead, build your life on what cannot be taken from you without your consent. Discipline, judgment, honest conduct, self-command, clarity of mind. These remain available even when approval disappears. There will be moments when acting rightly feels lonely. Accept this without self-pity. The disciplined path often separates you from people who prefer comfort over truth. Do not hate them. Do not become bitter. Simply refuse to join them in abandoning your own conscience. Your task is not to control how many people agree with you. Your task is to ensure that your actions can withstand honest examination when you are alone at night with your own thoughts. That is where real judgment occurs, not in crowds, not on screens, not in temporary applause, but in the silent moments where you confront yourself without distraction. Can you sit quietly with your own conscience without needing strangers to reassure you constantly? Can you accept responsibility for your choices without blaming approval pressure? Can you endure misunderstanding without betraying your principles? These are the questions that determine whether you are governing yourself or merely reacting to social fear. A disciplined person becomes difficult to manipulate because their decisions are not purchased through praise or threatened through criticism. Their center remains anchored in reason. This does not make them emotionless. It makes them stable. Stability is rare because most people surrender their inner state to external events every hour. One compliment lifts them upward. One insult crushes them downward. One disagreement ruins their peace. They live as prisoners of reaction because they never trained themselves to distinguish between what belongs to them and what belongs to others. Another person's approval belongs to them. Your conduct belongs to you. Never confuse the two again. Practice ending the day with examination instead of distraction. Ask yourself where approval influenced your behavior unnecessarily. Ask where fear of rejection weakened your honesty. Ask where you acted against your own judgment to remain comfortable. Then ask how reason would have acted differently. Do this consistently, and your awareness sharpens. You begin catching yourself before automatic people-pleasing takes control. You begin noticing how often anxiety appears when approval feels uncertain. You begin understanding that the mind can be trained away from emotional dependence through repeated disciplined attention. This is slow work. But all meaningful inner change is slow work. Do not expect instant transformation. Expect resistance from old habits. Expect discomfort when you stop chasing reassurance. Expect moments where loneliness tempts you back toward approval-seeking behavior. Continue anyway. Every time you act according to reason instead of fear, your character strengthens. Every time you tolerate disapproval without abandoning your principles, your mind becomes steadier. Every time you refuse to betray yourself for acceptance, you reclaim part of your freedom. You do not need strangers to approve your honest actions before those actions become valid. You do not need public permission to live according to discipline. You do not need universal understanding before changing your life. Your responsibility is not to become admired by everyone around you. Your responsibility is to become governed by reason rather than fear. One day your life will end whether people approved of you or not. Their opinions will disappear with time just as yours will. What remains meaningful is whether you used your limited days courageously or wasted them performing for temporary acceptance. Do not reach the end of your life realizing you spent decades asking others who you were allowed to become. Stand firmly in examined judgment. Accept responsibility for your actions completely. Correct yourself when reason reveals error. Remain calm when approval disappears. And stop placing your peace into hands that were never meant to carry it. Number 3. Discipline your emotions before defending yourself against ignorant judgment. A single careless opinion from another person can ruin your entire day because you still allow emotion to speak before reason has examined the situation. Someone questions your character, and immediately your pulse changes. Someone mocks your decisions, and your mind begins preparing retaliation before the moment has even settled. Someone judges you unfairly, and suddenly your peace belongs to them instead of you. This is the condition of an undisciplined inner life. You believe the suffering comes from their words when in truth it comes from your own ungoverned reaction to them. Look carefully at what happens inside you during criticism. The event itself is small, a sentence, a glance, a tone of disrespect. Yet within moments your mind creates anger, shame, resentment, fear, or humiliation. The external event enters through the senses, but the disturbance is created by judgment. You decide the insult is unbearable. You decide the criticism threatens your worth. You decide the misunderstanding must be corrected immediately. Then emotion rises like a fire you never trained yourself to control. The disciplined person does not deny emotion exists. They do not pretend insult feels pleasant. They do not become cold or lifeless, but they understand something essential that the reactive mind refuses to learn. Emotion must be examined before it is obeyed. This single principle changes an entire life. You have been trained by habit to treat emotional impulse as truth. If anger appears, you assume retaliation is necessary. If embarrassment appears, you assume defense is required. If frustration appears, you assume someone else caused your suffering. But emotion without examination is a dangerous ruler. It exaggerates threats. It invents enemies. It turns temporary discomfort into lasting conflict. The person who lacks self-command becomes easy to provoke because their reactions are predictable. A single insult controls their mood. A single criticism steals their clarity. A single misunderstanding sends them into endless mental arguments. Such a person may appear strong outwardly while remaining completely governed by external events inwardly. This is not strength. This is dependence. The disciplined mind asks a different question when judgment arrives. Is my reaction guided by reason or wounded pride? This pause is the beginning of freedom. Without this pause, you remain a prisoner of impulse. Notice how quickly the mind creates stories during conflict. Someone disagrees with you and suddenly you assume disrespect. Someone speaks carelessly and you interpret malice. Someone misunderstands your actions and you convince yourself they intended harm. You rarely examine these assumptions calmly because emotion rushes ahead and claims certainty before reason has even entered the conversation. This is why so much suffering becomes self-inflicted. You are not disturbed by events alone. You are disturbed by the interpretation you attach to them. A disciplined person understands that ignorant judgment from others often reveals more about their character than yours. Yet the reactive mind immediately turns outward. It wants revenge, it wants validation, it wants emotional victory. It wants the other person defeated so inner discomfort disappears. But no external victory can calm a mind that refuses to govern itself. You must stop treating every criticism like an emergency. Not every opinion deserves emotional involvement. Not every accusation deserves inner disturbance. Not every foolish judgment requires your immediate response. The first task is not defending yourself. The first task is mastering yourself. This becomes difficult because your ego wants instant action. It tells you silence means weakness. It tells you calmness means surrender. It tells you emotional intensity proves sincerity. But uncontrolled emotion proves only lack of discipline. The strongest mind in the room is often the quietest because it does not rush to react. It observes first. It examines first. It separates facts from emotional interpretation before speaking. You must begin training this discipline deliberately. The next time criticism reaches you, do not answer immediately. Feel the movement inside your body. Observe the heat of anger or the tightening of fear without becoming identical to it. Say to yourself clearly that emotion has appeared but judgment is still required. This small interruption weakens the automatic power of impulse. Most people never practice this. They spend entire lives reacting mechanically. They call it personality when it is often only habit strengthened through repetition. They say this is just how I am while refusing to train the very faculty that could free them from unnecessary suffering. You are capable of more than reaction, but capability means nothing without discipline. Each morning, prepare your mind before entering the world. Remind yourself that today you may encounter impatience, arrogance, unfair criticism, or misunderstanding. Expect these things as part of human life, rather than treating them as personal attacks against your peace. A prepared mind suffers less because it does not demand impossible conditions from reality. You cannot control whether ignorant people speak carelessly. You cannot prevent others from forming false opinions. You cannot guarantee fairness from every person you encounter. But you can control whether their behavior governs your inner state. This distinction must become practical, not theoretical. When insulted, ask yourself whether the criticism is true, false, or partially true. If true, then correction is needed, not emotional outrage. If false, then the error belongs to the other person's judgment, not your character. If partially true, then humility and reflection serve you better than defensive anger. In every case, uncontrolled emotion weakens clear perception. A disturbed mind cannot examine reality accurately. Anger narrows attention. Pride rejects correction. Fear exaggerates danger. Emotional reaction pulls you away from rational assessment and places your peace into unstable hands. This is why inner discipline matters more than winning arguments. Many people believe strength means dominating others verbally during conflict. They raise their voice, they sharpen their insults, they defend themselves aggressively, but afterward their minds remain restless because external victory cannot replace internal order. A person who truly governs themselves does not become frantic under judgment. They remain capable of reason even while criticized. Their dignity comes from self-command, not from overpowering others emotionally. You must understand how much energy reactive living steals from your life. Think about the hours lost replaying arguments internally. Think about the conversations you continue inside your head long after the event ended. Think about the emotional exhaustion created by defending your ego against every careless remark. This constant disturbance consumes mental strength that could have been directed toward virtue, discipline, and useful action. An untrained mind leaks energy continuously through emotional reaction. The disciplined life closes these leaks slowly through awareness and practice. One powerful exercise is learning to delay response intentionally, not because you fear conflict, but because you respect clarity more than impulse. When emotion rises, give your judgment time to breathe. A delayed response often reveals how unnecessary the original reaction truly was. Many conflicts survive only because both people react before thinking. You must become different from this. Another practice is separating your identity from temporary emotion. You are not your anger. You are not your wounded pride. You are not the fear that appears under criticism. These are movements within the mind, not the ruler of it. The ruling faculty exists in your capacity to examine, choose, and direct your response consciously. This understanding restores responsibility. Without it, you become a victim of every emotional wave that enters your mind. With it, you begin reclaiming authority over your inner life. Notice also how often your emotional reactions are connected to attachment. You become defensive because you are attached to reputation. You become furious because you are attached to being respected constantly. You become distressed because you are attached to controlling how others see you. The stronger the attachment, the stronger the disturbance when reality refuses to cooperate. The disciplined person loosens these attachments gradually. They focus more on maintaining honorable conduct than controlling external opinion. This reduces emotional volatility because their peace no longer depends entirely on how others behave. There is great freedom in no longer needing every interaction to confirm your value. When criticism arrives, you can examine it calmly instead of collapsing inwardly. When insult appears, you can remain composed instead of instantly retaliating. When misunderstood, you can tolerate temporary discomfort instead of chasing emotional resolution desperately. This is not weakness. This is mastery over self. A person who cannot regulate emotion becomes manipulable. Others learn how to control them easily. A few harsh words determine their mood. A little praise inflates them. A little disrespect destabilizes them. Their emotional life remains externally controlled because they never established discipline internally. Do not continue living this way. Train yourself to recognize the difference between pain and judgment. Harsh words may create an initial sting. That is natural, but prolonged suffering often comes from the story you continue building afterward. You replay the insult repeatedly. You imagine revenge. You construct imaginary arguments. You feed emotional disturbance through constant mental repetition. Then you blame the original event while ignoring your own participation in extending the suffering. The disciplined mind interrupts this process. It says the event has passed. Now only judgment remains, and judgment can be corrected. This is why evening reflection matters deeply. At the end of each day, examine where emotion governed your speech or actions. Where did irritation overcome reason? Where did pride reject useful criticism? Where did insecurity create unnecessary defense? Do not perform this examination to condemn yourself. Perform it to strengthen awareness. A person who observes their own mind honestly gains increasing power over it. Growth begins with seeing clearly. You cannot master reactions you refuse to acknowledge. There will be moments when remaining calm feels almost impossible. Certain criticisms strike directly at old wounds. Certain people know exactly how to provoke you. Certain situations awaken years of insecurity, frustration, or resentment. This is where your training matters most. Not in easy moments, but in difficult ones. Anyone can appear composed when life moves according to preference. Real discipline appears when events challenge your pride, comfort, or expectations. During such moments, simplify your focus. Return to basic questions. What is happening externally? What judgment am I adding internally? Which part belongs to my control? Which part does not? What response aligns with reason instead of impulse? These questions pull the mind back toward clarity. The goal is not emotional numbness. The goal is emotional governance. You are learning to experience feeling without surrendering your judgment to it. You are learning to remain rational under pressure instead of becoming a servant to temporary emotional storms. This practice transforms relationships because calmness changes the entire structure of conflict. When another person expects emotional chaos and receives disciplined composure, instead the cycle weakens immediately. You stop feeding anger with anger. You stop multiplying misunderstanding through impulsive speech. You stop creating new suffering while reacting to old suffering. And even when others remain unreasonable, your own mind stays more stable because you did not abandon yourself during the interaction. That matters greatly. Every moment of self-command strengthens character. Every restrained impulse builds inner authority. Every examined judgment increases freedom. Do not expect perfection quickly. Emotional habits built over years will resist change. There will be moments where anger escapes before reason catches it. There will be days where criticism disturbs you more than you expected. Continue practicing anyway. Discipline grows through repeated correction, not instant mastery. The person who keeps returning to reason eventually becomes difficult to shake inwardly. Criticism no longer controls them completely. Insults no longer dominate their attention for days. Misunderstanding no longer destroys their peace, because they finally understand that the true battlefield was never outside them. It was always within. Your task is not to eliminate every ignorant judgment from the world. Your task is to ensure that ignorance from others does not produce ignorance within yourself. That is the higher discipline. That is the beginning of real freedom. And that freedom becomes available the moment you stop asking emotion to lead and start demanding that reason examine every reaction before it becomes action. Number 4. Reject the urge to justify every personal decision publicly. You weaken your own judgment every time you turn a personal decision into a public negotiation. The moment you begin explaining your choices to everyone around you, your mind slowly stops asking whether your actions are reasonable and starts asking whether they are acceptable to other people. This shift appears small at first, but it changes the structure of your entire inner life. You stop living from examined conviction and begin living from anticipated reaction. Watch how quickly this happens in ordinary moments. You decide to change your habits and immediately feel pressure to defend the change. You choose distance from unhealthy relationships and suddenly feel obligated to provide explanations detailed enough to satisfy every opinion surrounding you. You make a decision about your work, your time, your priorities, or your boundaries, and before the action is even complete, your mind is already preparing arguments for invisible critics. This habit does not come from wisdom. It comes from insecurity disguised as communication. A disciplined person understands that not every decision requires public approval before it becomes valid. They understand that a calm conscience matters more than widespread agreement. They understand that reason must guide action long before popularity enters the conversation. You have spent too much time allowing external opinion to stand between your judgment and your choices. Because of this, your actions have become delayed, weakened, and divided. One part of you recognizes what should be done, while another part fears how others will interpret it. Then hesitation enters. You begin modifying decisions to reduce criticism rather than to increase virtue. Eventually, your life becomes shaped more by social pressure than by deliberate reason. This is how people lose themselves quietly over time, not through dramatic collapse, through daily surrender of independent judgment. A person who constantly explains every decision publicly reveals an undisciplined attachment to reputation. They fear misunderstanding more than self-betrayal. They fear disapproval more than inconsistency with their own principles. They believe peace will come once everyone accepts their reasons. But peace built on universal agreement can never remain stable because human opinion changes constantly. You must learn to separate two things clearly: honest reflection and compulsive justification. Honest reflection is necessary. It examines motives carefully. It asks whether actions are aligned with justice, moderation, courage, and self-command. It corrects error when reason exposes it. But compulsive justification is something different entirely. It is the endless attempt to protect your image in the minds of others. It seeks emotional safety through explanation rather than inner steadiness through disciplined conduct. One path strengthens character, the other strengthens dependence. Notice what happens after you make a personal decision. Instead of standing calmly within your own reasoning, you begin searching faces for reassurance. You monitor reactions. You adjust your confidence according to responses. Praise makes you feel certain. Criticism makes you doubt yourself instantly. This reveals that your confidence was never rooted in disciplined examination to begin with. It was borrowed temporarily from external approval. Borrowed confidence disappears quickly because it was never truly yours. A rational life requires something stronger than social reassurance. It requires the ability to examine a decision honestly and then carry it forward without needing constant emotional support from the crowd. This becomes difficult because you have trained yourself to seek relief through explanation. When discomfort appears, you start talking. When someone questions your choices, you rush into defense. When misunderstanding arises, you become desperate to correct perception immediately. But this urgency reveals attachment. You are not protecting truth. You are protecting the emotional comfort of being seen favorably. The disciplined mind asks a harder question. Did I act according to reason or according to fear? This question matters more than public reaction ever will. You must understand that many people do not actually seek understanding when they question your decisions. Some seek control. Some seek entertainment. Some seek confirmation of their own beliefs. Some simply dislike seeing another person act independently because it exposes their own lack of courage. If you spend your life trying to satisfy every external demand for explanation, your energy will disappear into endless emotional labor. Meanwhile, your own inner discipline remains neglected. There is wisdom in learning when silence protects clarity better than discussion. This does not mean becoming secretive, dishonest, or arrogant. It means recognizing that your personal life is not a courtroom where every choice requires public defense. A disciplined person speaks when speech serves truth or practical necessity. They do not speak merely to calm the discomfort created by possible judgment. You have mistaken exposure for authenticity. Not every thought needs announcement. Not every choice requires public processing. Not every transition demands universal understanding. Some decisions become stronger when carried quietly. A mind constantly seeking permission loses contact with its own authority. Before making any move, it asks, what will they think? Before establishing any boundary, it asks, will they approve? Before changing direction, it asks, how will this appear? These questions slowly corrupt judgment because they place appearance above substance. But Stoic discipline demands the opposite. Substance must come first. Character must come first. Rational examination must come first. External reaction belongs outside your control and therefore outside your deepest concern. This principle must become practical in daily life. When making decisions, begin asking yourself different questions. Is this action honest? Does this choice increase discipline or weaken it? Am I acting from clarity or emotional pressure? Would I still choose this if nobody praised me for it? These questions return authority to reason instead of public opinion. Then, once the decision is made, stop reopening it emotionally every time someone disagrees. A person without inner steadiness constantly revisits settled choices because criticism unsettles them. They seek reassurance again and again because their original judgment lacked rooted conviction. But the disciplined person accepts responsibility for thoughtful decisions without demanding endless confirmation afterward. You must train this steadiness deliberately. There will be moments where others misunderstand your silence. Let them misunderstand temporarily if necessary. There will be moments where people accuse you of changing. Accept that growth often disturbs those attached to your previous weakness. There will be moments where your refusal to explain frustrates individuals accustomed to unrestricted access to your inner life. Their frustration is not proof you acted wrongly. Do not measure the value of a decision by the comfort level of observers. Many harmful habits survive only because people fear external reaction more than internal decline. They remain in destructive environments because leaving requires explanation. They tolerate disrespect because boundaries invite criticism. They ignore their own conscience because independent action risks misunderstanding. This is how emotional dependence disguises itself as politeness. A disciplined person understands that courage sometimes appears quietly, not through dramatic speeches, but through calm refusal to abandon reason simply because others demand justification. You do not owe endless access to your private reasoning. You do not owe detailed explanations for every change in direction. You do not owe strangers emotional transparency simply because they are curious. Your responsibility is not to make every person comfortable with your choices. Your responsibility is to ensure your choices withstand honest examination within your own conscience. This distinction restores enormous mental freedom. Once you stop turning every decision into public property, your mind becomes quieter. You spend less time rehearsing defenses, less time predicting reactions, less time shaping your life around anticipated criticism. Attention returns to where it belongs: your conduct, your discipline, your use of time, your alignment with reason. This shift strengthens character because it reduces emotional fragmentation. A divided mind constantly performs. A disciplined mind acts with greater unity because it is no longer trying to satisfy multiple conflicting audiences simultaneously. Observe also how excessive justification often hides fear of solitude. If everyone agrees with your choices, then you never fully stand alone with them. But mature judgment requires the ability to remain steady even when approval is absent. This is not isolation, it is self-governance. Without this capacity, you become vulnerable to manipulation. People quickly learn that criticism controls you. They learn that disapproval forces explanation. They learn that your confidence weakens whenever external support disappears. Then your actions stop belonging entirely to reason and begin belonging partly to whoever reacts most strongly. This destroys inner freedom slowly. The disciplined path reverses this process by teaching you to return constantly to what actually belongs to your control. Your intentions belong to you. Your conduct belongs to you. Your willingness to act justly belongs to you. But whether others approve, understand, or agree does not. Keep returning to this distinction until it becomes instinctive. Morning discipline helps greatly here. Before beginning the day, remind yourself that not everyone will understand your decisions, and that this is not a crisis. Remind yourself that your task is not universal approval, but rational conduct. Prepare your mind for criticism before it arrives, so you are not emotionally shocked by ordinary human behavior. Then throughout the day, observe where the urge to over-explain appears. Notice how quickly discomfort pushes you toward justification. Notice how silence sometimes feels unsafe because you fear being judged unfairly. Instead of reacting automatically, remain still long enough to examine the impulse itself. Ask yourself, what exactly are you trying to protect? Truth rarely panics. A clear conscience rarely begs. The ego always does. This does not mean you should never explain yourself. Reasonable communication remains important. Responsibilities sometimes require clarification. Honest relationships require openness. But disciplined speech is measured by necessity, not emotional desperation. A rational explanation ends once understanding has been reasonably offered. It does not continue endlessly attempting to erase every possible negative interpretation. You must stop expecting complete control over how others perceive you. Such control has never existed. Human beings interpret actions through their own fears, desires, insecurities, and assumptions. Even perfect explanations cannot fully govern another person's judgment. Once you accept this deeply, your mind relaxes. You stop performing constant emotional maintenance on your image. You stop exhausting yourself, trying to appear flawless. You stop turning every personal decision into a debate, and something important begins to grow inside you. Quiet conviction. Quiet conviction does not need dramatic defense because it is rooted in examination rather than performance. It listens calmly to criticism without collapsing. It remains open to correction without becoming dependent on approval. It moves carefully but firmly once reason has judged a course of action worthy. This kind of steadiness cannot be purchased through admiration. It must be built through repeated acts of disciplined independence. At night, examine yourself honestly. Where did you speak merely to reduce discomfort? Where did you over-explain because you feared judgment? Where did you abandon simplicity and enter unnecessary defense? Then ask what a more disciplined response would have looked like. Do not condemn yourself during this process. Correction requires honesty, not self-hatred. The goal is progress toward greater self-command. You will notice over time that fewer words become necessary, not because you become detached from people, but because your relationship with your own judgment changes. You stop treating every disagreement as a threat. You stop treating misunderstanding as proof of failure. You stop measuring your decisions through emotional reaction from others. Your center shifts inward toward reasoned examination. This is where genuine confidence begins. Not in applause, not in endless explanation, not in managing appearances, but in the quiet knowledge that you have acted according to disciplined judgment as honestly as possible. And once that work is done, you must learn to let the world react as it will, because your life is too short to spend it constantly defending choices that were already made carefully within a sincere and disciplined mind. Number 5. Strengthen your character through quiet actions and steady restraint. You keep thinking your character is built in moments where you are seen, judged, or praised, but that is precisely where most people lose themselves. Real character is not formed in visibility. It is formed in the parts of your life no one applauds and no one interrupts. It is formed in the private decisions where only your reason is present and no audience exists to reward or punish you. Look at your own behavior honestly. How often do you act with intensity when others are watching but drift into laziness when no one notices? How often do you speak about discipline but abandon it when there is no external pressure to maintain it? How often do you promise change publicly but fail to sustain it privately? This is the gap between appearance and character, and it is here that most inner weakness lives. A disciplined life does not depend on recognition. It does not require visibility to remain consistent. It does not fluctuate based on who is observing. It is steady because it is rooted in reason, not reaction. You have been conditioned to believe that strength is loud, that progress must be announced, that effort must be validated, that change must be witnessed to be real. But this belief has quietly weakened you. It has trained your mind to seek reinforcement outside of yourself, rather than building stability within yourself. Every time you seek acknowledgement for small improvements, you interrupt the natural development of discipline. You turn internal work into external performance, and performance always demands continuation of appearance, even when inner commitment is fading. Quiet action is different. It does not ask to be seen. It does not rely on attention to continue. It does not collapse when unnoticed. It is consistent because it is governed by principle, not reaction. The disciplined person understands that most meaningful change happens without witnesses. They do not announce every adjustment in habit. They do not seek validation for every attempt at improvement. They do not rely on social acknowledgement to maintain direction. They act because reason has instructed them, not because recognition will reward them. This creates a different kind of strength, a strength that is not dependent on emotional reinforcement, a strength that does not rise and fall with attention, a strength that remains intact even in silence. You must examine how often your actions are influenced by imagined observers. Even when alone, you may still behave as if someone is watching. You may restrain yourself for appearance rather than principle. You may delay discipline until it can be shared. You may abandon effort when no one is present to notice it. This internal dependence on observation weakens character more than most people realize. A mind that requires visibility to act rightly is not free. It is still responding to external pressure, even when that pressure is imagined. Restraint is the foundation that supports quiet strength, not emotional restraint that suppresses truth, but disciplined restraint that prevents unnecessary reaction. It is the ability to pause before acting, to hold back from excess, to refuse impulsive speech, and to avoid reacting simply because emotion demands expression. Without restraint, action becomes scattered. Words become excessive, decisions become reactive, energy is lost in unnecessary movement. But with restraint, every action becomes deliberate, every word becomes intentional, every choice carries clarity instead of urgency. You can observe the difference in your daily life. When restraint is absent, your mind constantly moves outward, reacting to events, opinions, and impulses. When restraint is present, your attention returns inward, allowing reason to evaluate before action occurs. Most people mistake urgency for importance. They react quickly because they believe speed proves seriousness. But urgency without discipline is simply emotional instability. The disciplined person is not slow because they lack energy. They are deliberate because they refuse to be governed by impulse. Quiet strength does not announce itself because it does not need confirmation. It is already anchored in consistent action. It does not rely on external feedback to continue its course. It is self-sustaining because it is aligned with reason. You must begin separating action from recognition. Ask yourself before acting whether the decision is correct or whether it will simply be noticed. Many unnecessary behaviors disappear when this question is asked honestly. Much of what people do is not required by reason, but by the desire to be seen doing something meaningful. This desire weakens discipline because it shifts focus from internal alignment to external perception. Once this shift occurs, behavior becomes performative, and performative behavior cannot sustain long-term growth because it depends on continuous attention. Real development is often invisible. It happens in repetition, in consistency, in moments where no acknowledgement arrives and no reward is given. It happens when you choose discipline without emotional encouragement, when you continue effort without external motivation, When you act correctly without needing recognition to justify the effort, this is where character becomes stable. A person who can act correctly without being seen has reached a level of independence that most never develop. They are no longer dependent on applause or approval to maintain direction. They are guided by reason alone. To build this strength, you must practice daily invisibility. Not physical isolation, but intentional removal of external reinforcement from your actions. Do something correctly and let it remain unspoken. Complete a task and do not turn it into conversation. Maintain discipline without converting it into identity or image. Allow actions to exist without attaching them to recognition. This practice removes the need for validation gradually. At first it will feel uncomfortable because the mind is accustomed to reinforcement. You may feel the urge to share, to announce, to receive acknowledgement. Observe this urge without obeying it. It is not truth, it is habit seeking attention. With repetition, this urge weakens, and as it weakens, inner stability grows. You begin to understand that recognition adds nothing essential to the value of an action performed with discipline. The act itself is complete when aligned with reason. External awareness of it does not increase its worth. This realization changes how you move through life. You become less reactive to praise, less dependent on approval, less affected by silence from others, because your sense of direction is no longer tied to external feedback. At this stage, restraint becomes easier because it is no longer a struggle between impulse and attention. It becomes a natural expression of clarity. You do not restrain yourself to appear disciplined. You restrain yourself because unnecessary action no longer feels justified. There is also strength in learning to complete difficult actions without emotional display. Many people express their effort loudly because they are seeking reinforcement. They want acknowledgement to justify struggle. But the disciplined person does not need emotional decoration around their effort. They act quietly, complete the task, and move forward without turning difficulty into identity. This removes unnecessary suffering from the mind. When you stop broadcasting your effort, you stop expecting emotional reward from it. And when you stop expecting reward, effort becomes simpler and more stable. You must also examine your relationship with internal narration. Often the mind exaggerates the importance of small actions when seeking self-validation. It creates internal commentary to justify effort, but disciplined action does not require constant internal celebration. It requires steady execution guided by reason. When you remove unnecessary commentary, clarity increases. The mind becomes quieter and more focused. Action becomes more direct. Attention becomes less fragmented. This simplicity is strength. Throughout the day, observe where unnecessary expression appears. Notice where you speak or act, not because it is required, but because it will be noticed. Notice where restraint is absent because impulse feels more satisfying than discipline. Each observation becomes a point of correction rather than judgment. Evening reflection strengthens this awareness. Review where your actions were driven by appearance rather than principle, where restraint was replaced by impulsive reaction, where silence would have been more aligned with reason than speech. This practice trains the mind to recognize patterns of unnecessary behavior. Over time, you begin to reduce excess without force, not through suppression, but through understanding. You see clearly that unnecessary action adds no value to your character. It only creates dependence on external attention. A life built on quiet action becomes more stable because it is no longer subject to emotional fluctuations from recognition or neglect. It remains steady because its foundation is internal. There is also freedom in restraint, freedom from overreaction, freedom from emotional exaggeration, freedom from the need to constantly express internal states outwardly. The restrained mind is not suppressed, it is organized, it is not inactive, it is intentional. You must learn to trust this quiet strength more than visible intensity. Intensity fades quickly when unsupported. Quiet discipline endures because it is self-governed. Each time you choose restraint over reaction, you reinforce this structure. Each time you act without seeking recognition, you strengthen independence. Each time you complete effort without announcing it, you weaken attachment to approval. This is how character becomes stable over time, not through dramatic transformation, but through repeated quiet decisions aligned with reason. Eventually, you begin to notice a shift in how you experience life. You no longer feel compelled to display effort. You no longer measure progress through attention. You no longer depend on external acknowledgement to validate your direction. Your actions become lighter because they are no longer burdened by performance. And in this quiet state, discipline becomes natural, not forced, not announced, not dependent, but steady. This is where real character lives, in actions that require no audience, in restraint that requires no explanation, in consistency that continues even when no one is watching. When you reach this point, you are no longer building discipline for others to see. You are living it because reason has become your guide. Van call you edsen is not the absence of words. It's the presence of wisdom in knowing when not to speak. Number 6. Observe criticism calmly without surrendering your inner peace today. Criticism exposes something far more dangerous than the words spoken against you. It exposes the condition of your inner life at the exact moment you hear it. A calm mind hears criticism as information. An untrained mind hears it as a threat. Between these two responses lies the difference between discipline and suffering. Pay attention to your immediate reaction the next time someone judges you. Before any reasoning appears, there is a surge of emotion, tightness in the body, heat in the face, a sudden urge to defend or retaliate. This reaction is not truth. It is habit. It is your nervous system repeating patterns you have never questioned. And if you obey it without examination, you surrender control of your inner world to external voices. You have been treating criticism as if it defines you, as if another person's judgment has authority over your character, as if a careless opinion can alter the reality of who you are. This is where suffering begins, not in the criticism itself, but in the belief that criticism holds power over your peace. The disciplined mind separates two things immediately: the event and the interpretation. The words spoken by another person belong to them. The meaning you assign belongs to you. One cannot harm you without the other. Yet most people merge them instantly and suffer as if the judgment itself were reality. You must learn to interrupt this merging. When criticism arrives, do not accept it as truth immediately. Do not reject it immediately either. Begin by observing it as a mental object entering your awareness. This pause is not weakness, it is control. It is the space where reason replaces impulse. Ask yourself what exactly has been presented, not what you feel about it, not what your pride wants to defend, but what is actually being claimed. Most criticism dissolves when examined with clarity because it is often vague, exaggerated, or rooted in the other person's emotional state rather than objective truth. Even when criticism contains some truth, it does not demand emotional collapse. It demands evaluation. If there is accuracy in it, then correction is required. If there is distortion in it, then dismissal is appropriate. In both cases, inner peace remains intact when judgment is guided by reason instead of reaction. But you have trained yourself differently. You have trained yourself to treat disagreement as insult. You have trained yourself to treat correction as attack. You have trained yourself to treat misunderstanding as injustice. This training has made your mind fragile. It has made your emotional state dependent on constant approval. A disciplined person reverses this conditioning. They no longer treat criticism as an emergency, they treat it as a moment for examination. They do not rush into defense because defense assumes threat before analysis, and most perceived threats dissolve when examined carefully. Look at how much energy is lost when you react emotionally to criticism. Your attention splits, your thoughts become defensive, you replay the words repeatedly, you imagine counter-arguments, you construct justifications internally as if you are preparing for a trial that exists only in your mind. This mental turbulence steals your ability to think clearly and act effectively. All of this suffering is optional, not because criticism feels pleasant, but because your response is under your control. You must begin practicing deliberate non-reaction. When criticism appears, do not speak immediately. Let the impulse pass through awareness without turning it into action. This small delay changes everything. It creates space between stimulus and response. In that space, reason can operate. Most people never access this space because they are addicted to immediate reaction. They believe speed equals strength. In reality, speed without reflection is instability. A mind that reacts instantly is a mind governed by impulse rather than wisdom. You must also understand that not all criticism deserves equal attention. Some criticism comes from ignorance, some comes from projection, some comes from frustration unrelated to you, and some comes from genuine observation. A disciplined mind does not treat all of these as equally important. The first task is identification. What type of criticism is this? Is it rooted in fact or emotion? Is it specific or vague? Is it aimed at improvement or control? This analysis removes unnecessary emotional weight from the situation. You are not obligated to accept every judgment offered to you. You are obligated to examine it. This distinction protects your peace. Another source of suffering is the belief that criticism reduces your worth. You assume that being judged negatively means something has been lost from your identity, but your character is not created or destroyed by external opinion. It is revealed through your actions and decisions. No sentence spoken by another person can alter your moral capacity unless you allow it to distort your judgment. If someone is wrong about you, their wrongness belongs to them. If they are partially right, then improvement belongs to you. In neither case is emotional disturbance necessary. You must train yourself to respond with clarity rather than defense. When criticism is true, accept it without pride. When it is false, dismiss it without anger. When it is unclear, wait until understanding is possible. This measured response preserves inner stability while allowing reason to guide action. Your current habit likely leans toward emotional interpretation. You feel criticized, then you feel attacked, then you feel compelled to respond. This chain reaction bypasses reason entirely. It gives emotional impulse authority over your behavior, and once emotion leads, peace disappears quickly. To change this, you must practice examining the first moment of reaction, the moment before words form, the moment before justification begins, the moment where discomfort first appears. That is where discipline must enter. Do not trust the first interpretation your mind produces. It is often shaped by ego rather than truth. The ego interprets criticism as danger because it equates self-image with survival, but reason does not confuse opinion with harm. Start questioning your automatic interpretations. Is this truly harmful, or is it merely uncomfortable? Is there actual injustice here, or only disagreement? Is my reaction aligned with reason or driven by wounded pride? These questions weaken impulsive response and strengthen rational judgment. You will notice something important when you begin this practice. Much of what disturbs you in criticism fades when examined closely. The emotional intensity decreases once interpretation is corrected. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable once seen clearly. This is because suffering is often created by unexamined judgment rather than external reality. A disciplined mind does not avoid criticism. It uses it as material for refinement, but it does not allow criticism to invade its emotional stability. There is a difference between listening and surrendering. You can observe without absorbing. You can evaluate without internalizing. You can learn without collapsing. This ability must be trained deliberately. Each morning, prepare yourself for criticism as a natural part of human interaction. Expect that not every judgment you receive will be fair or accurate. By expecting this, you remove surprise from the experience, and without surprise, emotional reaction weakens. Throughout the day, practice slowing your response. When criticism appears, take a moment of silence internally. Observe your physical and emotional reaction without acting on it immediately. This pause is the beginning of mastery. In the evening, reflect honestly on moments where criticism disturbed your peace. Do not judge yourself harshly. Simply observe where reaction occurred faster than reason. Awareness alone begins the process of change. Over time, you will notice that criticism loses its power to destabilize you. Not because you become indifferent, but because you become precise in your interpretation. You no longer accept every judgment as truth. You no longer allow emotional reflex to dictate response. You no longer confuse external opinion with internal reality. Your peace becomes less fragile because it is no longer tied to approval or disapproval. There will still be moments of discomfort. That is natural. But discomfort will no longer become disturbance. It will become information, something to examine rather than something to suffer under. This shift is essential because without it, every critical voice you encounter will continue shaping your emotional state, and a mind shaped by external voices cannot remain stable. You must reclaim authority over interpretation, not by rejecting all criticism, but by refusing to surrender your inner peace to it. When reason governs response, criticism becomes useful without becoming destructive, and your mind remains steady regardless of external judgment. This is the practice: to observe without reaction, to examine without fear, to respond from clarity instead of impulse, and to preserve inner peace even while being judged. That is where real discipline begins. Number 7. Master your reactions when people misunderstand your honest intentions. Misunderstanding is one of the most immediate tests of your inner discipline because it strikes directly at your desire to be seen clearly and fairly by others. The moment someone misinterprets your intentions, you feel an instinctive tightening inside the mind. You want to correct it quickly. You want to repair your image. You want to restore accuracy in their perception. But this urgency is not reason. It is emotional discomfort, demanding immediate relief. You must learn to see this moment with clarity. The misunderstanding itself is not what disturbs you. What disturbs you is your attachment to being correctly perceived. You assume that if your intentions are not understood, then something essential about you has been damaged. This assumption is the source of your reaction, not the misunderstanding itself. A disciplined mind begins by separating intention from interpretation. Your intention belongs to your inner judgment. The other person's interpretation belongs to their reasoning process. These two are not under the same authority. Yet you behave as if they must always align for you to remain at peace. This expectation creates constant inner tension because it demands control over something you do not govern. You do not control how others interpret your actions. You control only whether your actions are guided by reason, honesty, and discipline. When this distinction is forgotten, you begin reacting emotionally every time someone misunderstands you. You rush into explanation. You overextend your speech. You try to correct every detail as if perfect clarity in another mind is your responsibility. But this behavior does not strengthen truth. It weakens your inner stability because it places your peace in the hands of external understanding. Observe how quickly misunderstanding can distort your emotional state. A simple misreading of your actions can trigger frustration, defensiveness, or disappointment. You may begin replaying conversations, constructing arguments in your mind, or imagining how to restore your image. All of this internal activity is driven not by necessity but by resistance to being misperceived. You must recognize that this resistance is rooted in ego attachment. The ego wants recognition of purity in intention. It wants acknowledgement of fairness in behavior. It wants assurance that others see it correctly. But Stoic discipline does not depend on external validation of inner intent. It depends on the integrity of action itself. If your actions were guided by reason, justice, and restraint, then misunderstanding does not alter their moral value. The perception of others cannot change the quality of a rational decision already made, yet you often behave as if misunderstanding reduces your worth. This is where unnecessary suffering begins. A rational mind does not panic when misjudged. It evaluates the situation calmly. It asks whether correction is necessary or whether silence is sufficient. It does not assume that every misunderstanding must be resolved immediately. It understands that some perceptions are temporary and will change without intervention. Others are irrelevant to your character altogether. You weaken yourself when you try to control every interpretation of your behavior. This attempt leads to emotional exhaustion because human perception is unstable, varied, and influenced by countless personal biases. You cannot stabilize something that is not under your control, but you can stabilize your response to it. The first discipline is restraint. When you are misunderstood, do not respond immediately. Allow the emotional surge to settle before speaking or acting. In that space between stimulus and response, reason becomes available again. Without this pause, your reaction is driven by emotional urgency rather than thoughtful judgment. Most people never create this space. They react instantly because they equate silence with weakness. But silence at the moment of misunderstanding is not weakness. It is control over impulse. It is the refusal to let emotional disturbance dictate your actions. In many cases, the impulse to correct misunderstanding immediately is unnecessary. Time itself often resolves misinterpretations without effort. People reassess their judgments naturally as they observe consistency in your actions over time. But when you rush to correct every misunderstanding, you create dependence on constant explanation, which weakens your ability to remain steady under judgment. You must also examine whether your desire for correction is truly about truth or about emotional comfort. Often the urge to clarify is driven by discomfort rather than necessity. You do not always need to restore perfect understanding in others. You need to ensure your own conduct remains aligned with reason. Ask yourself clearly in moments of misunderstanding whether your response is required for clarity or merely for emotional relief. This question exposes whether you are acting from discipline or from insecurity. There is also a deeper lesson you must confront. Even when your intentions are honest, they will not always be understood. Human perception is limited. People interpret actions through their own experiences, fears, and expectations. No amount of explanation can fully eliminate distortion in another mind. This is not a flaw in your communication. It is a limitation of human judgment itself. When you accept this, your emotional dependence on being understood begins to weaken. You stop treating misunderstanding as a personal failure. You start seeing it as a normal aspect of human interaction. The disciplined response is simple. Act according to reason. Speak clearly when necessary. Then release attachment to how the action is received. This does not mean indifference to truth. It means acceptance that truth does not require universal agreement to remain valid. You must also guard against the temptation to over-explain. Overexplanation is often a sign that you are trying to control perception rather than communicate truth. When you repeat yourself excessively or expand your justification beyond necessity, you are attempting to reduce emotional discomfort rather than clarify reality. This habit drains your inner strength because it turns communication into performance. Instead of expressing truth, you begin performing clarity for approval. And performance always creates dependence on reaction. A disciplined mind keeps communication precise. It speaks when needed and stops when clarity has been reasonably established. It does not continue speaking to erase every possible misunderstanding because that task is impossible. You are not responsible for eliminating all misinterpretation. You are responsible for maintaining integrity in your own conduct. This distinction frees you from unnecessary emotional labor. When you stop trying to control how every intention is perceived, you regain energy that was previously spent on defending your image. That energy returns to your actual life. Your actions become more deliberate. Your attention becomes more focused. Your mind becomes less reactive. You must also examine how misunderstanding affects your self-perception. Many people allow external misjudgment to influence how they see themselves. If others interpret your intention incorrectly, you begin doubting your own clarity. This is a deeper instability. It means your self-understanding is not anchored in reason but in external agreement. A disciplined person does not lose self-clarity because others are confused. They return to their own reasoning process. They ask whether their intention was honest and whether their action was guided by rational judgment. If the answer is yes, then external misunderstanding does not alter internal clarity. You must train this inner independence deliberately. Each morning remind yourself that today you may be misunderstood even when acting rightly. Prepare your mind for this possibility so it does not destabilize you when it occurs. This preparation reduces emotional shock and allows you to respond with greater composure. During the day, observe moments where you feel misunderstood. Instead of reacting immediately, pause and examine your internal state. Notice whether your discomfort arises from actual wrongdoing or from attachment to perception. Most often it arises from the latter. This awareness creates distance between you and impulse. In that distance, reason can operate. In the evening, reflect on situations where misunderstanding disturbed your peace. Identify where reaction replaced reflection. Identify where explanation became excessive. Identify where emotional urgency took priority over calm judgment. This reflection strengthens awareness of your patterns without self-condemnation. Over time, something changes. Misunderstanding no longer dominates your emotional state. You begin to see it as part of life rather than a threat to identity. Your response becomes measured instead of reactive. Your words become fewer but clearer. Your mind remains steady even when perception around you is unstable. This is not detachment from people. It is stability within yourself, regardless of people's perceptions. There is quiet strength in being able to remain composed while misunderstood. It shows that your peace is not dependent on perfect external alignment. It shows that your judgment is anchored internally. It shows that you are no longer controlled by the need to be correctly interpreted at every moment. You begin to realize that much of your previous suffering came not from misunderstanding itself, but from your resistance to it. Once resistance decreases, suffering decreases with it. At this stage, you can interact with the world more freely. You can act honestly without fearing misinterpretation. You can speak clearly without anxiety over reception. You can live according to reason without constantly adjusting yourself to avoid distortion in others. Your focus shifts from controlling perception to refining action. That is where real discipline lives, not in being perfectly understood, but in remaining steady even when you are not. Number 8. Detach your worth from opinions spoken by unstable minds. You keep placing your worth in the hands of minds that are not steady enough to judge even their own lives clearly. One moment their opinion rises and you feel elevated. The next moment their opinion shifts and you feel diminished. This is not dignity. This is dependence disguised as sensitivity. And it reveals how little control you have allowed yourself to keep over your own inner judgment. You must see the truth without avoidance. Most opinions you react to are not rooted in wisdom. They are formed from emotion, impulse, bias, frustration, envy, insecurity, or ignorance. Yet you have been treating these unstable expressions as if they contain authority over your value. Each time you accept such judgments as meaningful, you surrender another portion of your inner stability. Your worth does not move when another person speaks. It does not rise with praise or fall with criticism. What moves is only your perception of yourself, and that perception becomes unstable when it is built on external voices instead of rational self-examination. A disciplined mind begins by separating what is truly within its control from what is not. The opinions of others belong entirely outside your control. You do not choose their perspective. You do not shape their emotional state. You do not govern their level of understanding. Yet you have been behaving as if all of this is your responsibility. That belief is the root of unnecessary suffering. When you rely on unstable minds for validation, you hand your inner authority to conditions that constantly change. A person who is inconsistent in judgment cannot provide a stable foundation for your identity. You would not trust a broken instrument to measure reality. Yet you trust unstable opinion to measure your worth. You must correct this error at its foundation. Your value is determined by your capacity for reason, discipline, and virtue in action. It is not determined by emotional reactions from people who may not even understand themselves clearly. When you forget this, you begin to chase approval. You adjust behavior to fit expectations that shift endlessly. You become reactive instead of grounded. You lose alignment with your own rational nature. Observe how quickly emotional instability spreads when you depend on external validation. A compliment can inflate your self-perception beyond reason. A criticism can collapse it entirely. This instability is evidence that your sense of worth is not anchored internally. It is floating on the unpredictable surface of other people's moods. A stable mind refuses to participate in this fluctuation. Instead of asking what others think of me, the disciplined person asks whether their own judgment is aligned with reason. Instead of reacting to approval or disapproval, they evaluate whether their actions are just, measured, and consistent with self-command. This shift removes external voices from the center of identity. You do not need universal agreement to act rightly. You do not need consistent praise to remain steady. You do not need validation from those who are themselves inconsistent in thought and emotion. Many of the opinions that disturb you come from people who have never examined their own minds with honesty. They react quickly, judge impulsively, and change positions without reflection. To allow such instability to define your worth is to abandon reason in favor of noise. You must learn to observe opinions without absorbing them. Not every voice that reaches you deserves entry into your self-perception. Some opinions are irrelevant, some are uninformed, some are projections of the speaker's own internal conflict. The disciplined mind filters before it accepts. This filtering is not arrogance. It is clarity. When you treat every opinion as meaningful, you lose discrimination. You begin to confuse volume with truth. You begin to confuse confidence in speech with accuracy in judgment. You begin to confuse emotional intensity with rational insight. These confusions weaken your ability to see yourself clearly. Your task is not to eliminate external opinion. Your task is to stop allowing it to define internal identity. Begin each morning by reinforcing this separation. Remind yourself that today you will encounter voices that are uncertain, reactive, and subjective. Prepare your mind in advance so that when these voices appear, they do not destabilize your focus. Expect inconsistency from others so that it does not surprise you. During the day, when you encounter praise or criticism, pause before responding internally. Notice the immediate emotional reaction. Do not follow it blindly. Observe it as a movement within the mind rather than a truth about your worth. This small pause creates space between stimulus and identity. In that space, reason can reassert control. Ask yourself whether the opinion reflects genuine understanding or emotional impulse. Most opinions lose authority when examined carefully. Very few are grounded in disciplined reasoning. Recognizing this reduces their emotional impact significantly. You must also examine your own tendency to seek approval from unstable sources. Why do you require validation from minds that are not governed by reason? Why do you allow yourself to be shaped by judgments that you would not trust in serious matters? This contradiction reveals a lack of internal grounding. When your sense of worth depends on unstable opinion, you become reactive to everything. Your emotional state becomes a reflection of external fluctuation rather than internal stability. You begin to live in response mode rather than deliberate mode. Each reaction pulls you further away from rational self-governance. To reverse this, you must build internal reference points that do not shift with external opinion. Your actions should be measured against principles of discipline, honesty, restraint, and rational clarity. These standards remain constant even when external opinions change. A person anchored in these principles does not become disturbed by fluctuating judgment. They evaluate themselves through consistent internal criteria rather than inconsistent external commentary. This does not mean ignoring feedback that is useful. Reasonable criticism can refine behavior when it is grounded in understanding, but you must distinguish between constructive insight and unstable opinion. One is aimed at improvement. The other is often aimed at expression without reflection. When you stop treating all opinions as equal, your mind becomes clearer. You begin to recognize which voices deserve attention and which do not. You stop wasting emotional energy on judgments that have no rational weight. This preservation of attention is essential for inner discipline. You will notice that much of your past suffering came not from the opinions themselves, but from your decision to treat them as significant. Once this realization settles, your emotional dependence begins to weaken. You no longer experience every external judgment as a reflection of your identity. Instead, you begin returning to yourself. At night, reflect on moments where external opinion influenced your emotional state. Identify where you allowed unstable judgment to shape your self-perception. Do not judge yourself harshly for this awareness. Use it only to strengthen recognition of the pattern. With repetition, you will develop immunity to unnecessary disturbance, not by becoming indifferent, but by becoming precise in what you accept as meaningful. Emotional stability will increase as external influence decreases. Eventually, you will understand that worth does not require approval from minds that are not steady. It requires alignment with reason, discipline, and inner clarity. These do not fluctuate with public opinion. They remain stable even when external judgment is inconsistent. This is where freedom begins, not in receiving universal approval, but in no longer needing it to know your own value. When your inner standard becomes rational rather than reactive, unstable minds lose their ability to define you. They may speak, but they no longer determine how you see yourself. And in that separation, peace becomes independent rather than borrowed. That is the foundation of true inner stability. Number 9. Govern your thoughts before speaking unnecessary words to anyone. Every unnecessary word you speak begins as an uncontrolled thought you failed to examine. Before speech ever leaves your mouth, It already passed through your mind without discipline. This is where most people lose mastery over themselves, not in public failure, but in private negligence of thought. You believe speaking is harmless as long as intentions feel justified. But speech without examination exposes the state of your inner governance. When thoughts are not governed, words become scattered. When words are scattered, life becomes noisy. And a noisy life is always a sign of an undisciplined mind. You must confront the uncomfortable truth that much of your speaking is not required by reason. It is driven by impulse, discomfort, desire for approval, or avoidance of silence. You speak to fill space. You speak to appear engaged. You speak to release internal tension. But none of these are rational necessities. A disciplined mind does not begin with speech. It begins with examination. Before you speak, there is a moment where thought presents itself. In that moment, you either govern it or you allow it to move forward unchecked. Most people allow it to move forward because they do not pause long enough to question whether it deserves expression. This lack of pause is the root of verbal excess. You must learn to treat thought as material that requires inspection, not automatic expression. Every thought is not a command. Every impulse is not a truth. Every emotional reaction is not something that must be spoken aloud. When you fail to govern thought, you begin speaking from reaction instead of reason. You say things you did not examine. You respond faster than clarity allows. You fill conversations with unnecessary commentary that adds nothing of value. Over time, this weakens your character because it trains your mind to prioritize expression over judgment. A disciplined person reverses this pattern entirely. They slow the movement from thought to speech. They insert examination between impulse and expression. They ask whether the thought is necessary, whether it is true, and whether it contributes anything meaningful before allowing it to become words. This simple act of internal governance transforms communication. It removes excess, it reduces regret, it increases clarity, and it restores control over attention. You have likely experienced moments where you spoke too quickly and immediately recognized that silence would have been better. In those moments, you did not lack intelligence, you lacked discipline over timing. Your mind produced content faster than your judgment could evaluate it. This mismatch creates unnecessary speech. To correct this, you must train awareness of internal motion. Notice how thoughts arise without invitation. Notice how quickly you feel the urge to express them. Do not trust that urgency. Urgency is often emotional pressure, not rational necessity. The mind that speaks without examination is always reacting to something internal. It may be seeking validation. It may be avoiding discomfort. It may be trying to assert presence. It may be escaping silence. But none of these motivations belong to reason. Reason speaks only when speech is required. You must begin distinguishing between expression that is necessary and expression that is habitual. Necessary speech serves clarity, justice, or practical communication. Habitual speech serves emotional release or social stimulation. The difference between the two determines whether your words strengthen or weaken your discipline. Each time you speak without necessity, you train your mind to value expression over restraint. Each time you restrain unnecessary speech, you strengthen your ability to govern thought before it becomes action. This is not about silence for its own sake. It is about precision in expression. Before speaking, ask yourself whether silence would produce better clarity than words. In many cases, silence preserves more truth than speech distorts. Not everything that enters your mind requires externalization. Some thoughts dissolve when observed carefully without expression. You must also recognize how uncontrolled speech weakens relationships. When you speak excessively, you reduce the value of your words. When everything is said without restraint, nothing carries weight. People begin to ignore what could have been meaningful because it is buried in unnecessary language. Restraint restores meaning to speech. You also lose internal stability when you speak without examining thought. Words once spoken cannot be recalled. They create consequences that the mind must later manage. Regret often comes not from action alone, but from speech that bypassed judgment. This is why governance of thought is essential. It prevents unnecessary consequences before they are created. A disciplined morning begins with preparation of the mind for this responsibility. Before entering conversation with others, remind yourself that your mind will produce many thoughts throughout the day, but not all deserve expression. This prepares you to observe thought without immediate reaction. During the day, practice pausing before responding in conversation. When a thought arises, do not assume it must be spoken. Hold it internally for a moment. Examine whether it is necessary, whether it is helpful, and whether it aligns with reason. This pause is where discipline is formed. Most conversations are filled with automatic responses that were never examined. Opinions are given without reflection. Reactions are spoken without consideration. Commentary flows without necessity. This creates mental clutter, both in yourself and in others. You must break this pattern deliberately. Start noticing how often you speak simply because silence feels uncomfortable. This discomfort is not a sign that speech is needed. It is a sign that your mind is unaccustomed to restraint. Silence reveals the state of your inner discipline more clearly than speech ever does. At first, restraint will feel unnatural. The mind will urge you to speak quickly. It will create justifications for unnecessary expression. It will suggest that silence might be misunderstood or that speech is required to maintain presence. These are not rational instructions. They are habits resisting correction. You must observe these impulses without obeying them immediately. With repetition, the gap between thought and speech begins to expand. In that gap, clarity grows. You begin to notice how many thoughts are unworthy of expression. You begin to recognize how often silence serves better than speech. You begin to feel less compelled to respond instantly to every internal impulse. This is the beginning of mastery. Evening reflection is essential for strengthening this discipline. Review moments where you spoke without necessity. Identify where speech could have been replaced with silence. Identify where reaction replaced examination. Do not judge yourself harshly. Observe patterns clearly so they can be corrected. Over time, you will notice that your speech becomes more deliberate. You will speak less frequently, but with greater precision. Your words will carry more weight because they are no longer diluted by excess. Conversations will become clearer because you are no longer contributing unnecessary noise. This transformation does not make you withdrawn. It makes you precise. It allows communication to serve purpose rather than impulse. It aligns expression with reason instead of reaction. You will also notice that your inner life becomes quieter. When speech is governed, thought itself begins to stabilize. You no longer feel compelled to externalize every internal movement. The mind becomes less reactive because it is no longer immediately expressed outwardly. This creates a deeper form of control, not control over others, control over your own inner process before it becomes action. There will still be moments where speech slips past examination. That is part of training. Do not let imperfection discourage discipline. The goal is not immediate perfection, but consistent awareness. Each correction strengthens future restraint. Eventually, governance of thought becomes natural. You no longer feel constant pressure to speak. You no longer treat every thought as important. You no longer equate verbal expression with presence or value. Instead, you begin to understand that silence governed by reason is stronger than speech governed by impulse. This is the foundation of disciplined communication. to examine thought before expression, to choose silence when it serves clarity, to speak only when reason confirms necessity. When this practice becomes stable, your words begin to reflect your character more accurately. Not because you speak more, but because you speak with intention rather than reaction. And in that intention, inner discipline becomes visible without needing to be announced. Number 10. Live according to virtue without seeking permission from others. You keep delaying your own life while waiting for permission that will never come. You look at your choices through the imagined eyes of others and hesitate as if their approval is required for your conscience to function. This hesitation is not wisdom. It is dependence disguised as caution. And it is one of the clearest signs that you have not yet learned to govern yourself. Virtue does not wait for permission. Reason does not request approval. A disciplined mind does not pause its integrity until it is socially accepted. Yet you have been trained to measure your actions through external reaction instead of internal clarity. This is why your decisions feel unstable. You are not guided by principle. You are guided by anticipated judgment. You must confront the uncomfortable reality that much of your inner conflict comes from this constant negotiation with imagined opinions. Before acting, you ask, how will this be seen? Before choosing, you ask, what will they think? Before changing direction, you ask, who will approve? Each of these questions pulls you away from reason and places authority outside yourself. A life built on virtue cannot function under this condition. Virtue is not something granted by others. It is not validated by applause. It is not strengthened by agreement. It exists in the quality of your judgment and the alignment of your actions with reason, justice, courage, and restraint. These standards do not change depending on audience. They remain constant even when misunderstood or ignored. When you seek permission from others to live rightly, you are silently admitting that their opinion holds more weight than your own understanding of what is good. This is a reversal of natural order. Your capacity for reason is the faculty through which you evaluate truth. If you surrender that authority to unstable external judgment, you abandon the very tool meant to guide your life. You must begin restoring that authority internally. Every time you hesitate because of imagined approval or disapproval, you weaken your own judgment. Every time you adjust your actions to avoid criticism rather than to maintain integrity, you drift further from virtue. And every time you wait for reassurance before acting rightly, you train yourself to depend on something outside your control. The disciplined person does not ask whether virtue is acceptable to others. They ask whether their action aligns with reason. If it does, they proceed without delay. If it does not, they correct it regardless of opinion. Their standard is internal coherence, not external agreement. You must understand that most resistance you fear from others is not as powerful as your imagination suggests. Much of it is anticipated rather than actual. The mind exaggerates social consequences because it prefers avoidance over confrontation. But avoidance of judgment from others often leads to betrayal of judgment within yourself. That inner betrayal is more damaging than any external criticism. You have likely already experienced moments where you acted against your better understanding simply to avoid disapproval. In those moments, you did not gain peace, you lost it. Because violating your own reason creates internal disorder that external approval cannot repair. This is why virtue must be practiced independently of permission. It must be chosen because it is right, not because it is safe or popular. Safety may change, popularity may shift, but reason remains constant. You must begin observing how often your decisions are influenced by imagined observers. Even when alone, you may still act as if someone is evaluating your behavior. This internal audience becomes more controlling than any real person. It shapes your hesitation, your speech, your choices, and even your silence. To break this pattern, you must practice acting from principle before perception. Before you act, Ask whether the action is just, disciplined, and consistent with rational judgment. If the answer is yes, proceed without seeking external validation. If the answer is no, correct it immediately without concern for opinion. This removes the need for permission entirely. You are not here to negotiate your conscience with others. You are here to govern your actions through reason. Each morning you must reinforce this commitment. Remind yourself that today your actions will be guided by virtue, not approval. Expect that some choices will not be understood. Expect that some decisions will not be praised. Expect that some paths will be questioned. These expectations prepare your mind to remain steady when external reaction occurs. A prepared mind is less easily shaken. Throughout the day, observe moments where you delay action due to fear of judgment. Notice how often hesitation is not based on reason, but on imagined reaction. In these moments, pause and return to your internal standard. Ask whether you are delaying because the action is wrong or because it might be misunderstood. This distinction is essential. Many people confuse discomfort with moral uncertainty, but discomfort often arises simply because independence feels unfamiliar. When you begin acting from internal principle, the mind initially resists because it is accustomed to external validation. You must continue despite this resistance. Virtue becomes stable only through repetition without permission. There is also a deeper liberation that comes from this practice. When you no longer depend on others to authorize your integrity, you are no longer vulnerable to their approval or rejection. Your emotional state becomes less reactive because it is no longer tied to external evaluation. You act, observe consequences, and adjust based on reason, not on emotional pressure from others. This creates inner stability that cannot be easily disrupted. You also begin to notice that people who rely heavily on external approval often struggle with inconsistency. Their values shift depending on audience. Their decisions change depending on feedback. Their identity becomes fragmented because it lacks a single internal standard. You must avoid this fragmentation by anchoring yourself in reason alone. Reason does not require permission to function. It only requires attention. When you consistently return to reason before action, your life begins to align more naturally. Decisions become clearer because they are no longer filtered through fear of judgment. Actions become more direct because they are no longer burdened by imagined approval. And inner conflict decreases because you are no longer divided between principle and perception. You must also recognize that seeking permission often disguises fear of responsibility. When you wait for others to approve your actions, you are attempting to share responsibility for outcomes that belong to you, but rational living requires full ownership of your choices. You cannot outsource accountability while still claiming control over your life. Ownership of action is the foundation of freedom. You must begin reclaiming that ownership by acting without waiting for validation. Start with small decisions. Speak when silence is appropriate. Choose when hesitation is unnecessary. Set boundaries without seeking reassurance. Act according to reason, even when no one confirms your decision. With repetition, this strengthens internal authority. Evening reflection becomes important in this process. Examine where you delayed action due to fear of judgment. Identify where you compromised principle for approval. Observe these moments without self-condemnation. The purpose is awareness, not guilt. Awareness allows correction. Guilt only creates further hesitation. Over time, you will notice a shift in your internal structure. The need for permission weakens. The influence of external opinion decreases. The clarity of internal judgment strengthens. You begin to trust reason more than reaction and principle more than approval. At this stage, virtue becomes natural rather than forced. You no longer debate whether it is acceptable to act rightly. You simply act, not because others agree, but because reason has already confirmed the path. This is where real independence begins. not in isolation from others, but in freedom from needing their permission to live according to what you already know is right. When your actions are governed by virtue instead of validation, your life becomes stable even in uncertainty. And that stability cannot be granted by any external approval. It can only be built through disciplined self-governance. That is the final task, to live not as someone waiting to be permitted to act rightly, but as someone who has already accepted responsibility to do so without hesitation.